Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Merle Massey. I am the coordinator for undergraduate research at the University of Saskatchewan. Sorry, someone just requested to annotate as we're going along. So yes, I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research here at the University of Saskatchewan. I work in the Office of the Vice President Research, and I'm here because when I was a student, I didn't understand about the whole research culture of the university when I first came on board. So I thought this might be a really good way to kind of give you guys a bit of an overview of what research is across the university. All right, so we'll go from there. First, as I always start, as we gather here today, we acknowledge that I myself sit on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I pay my respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. You'll find underneath that is my own personal land acknowledgement that I developed with the Gwenama Center. And if any of you get a chance to do that, to work with the Gwenama Center and take their training and develop your own land acknowledgement, it's a high recommend from me. Okay, so first I thought I'd tell you guys a little bit about me. So I knew nothing about research. That's why I decided to set up this particular overview. But all my degrees are from USask. I am from Saskatchewan, born and raised north of Prince Albert. I now farm on the prairies with my husband. All my degrees are from USask. I walked into the University of Saskatchewan in the fall of 1989, and I have a double honors degree in English and history. I took a year off, then I came back, did my master's in history, finished that in 1997. Then I took a whole lot of time off. I got married, had kids, moved away, moved back, things like that. Came back and did my PhD in history, and I won that in 2010. I immediately followed that up with a postdoctoral fellowship in the School of Environment and Sustainability on campus. It was an international fellowship, so that was great. And when that was finished, I was offered a position as an adjunct professor with SENS, which sounds great, and I still have that position, but it doesn't actually pay any money, just FYI. Adjunct professors in Canada are unpaid, but I get to be connected to SENS, which is fun. But I did have a postdoctoral fellowship from SSHRC, and I'll talk to you guys about SSHRC and what that is in a couple of minutes. Then I did some research positions on campus. I was a research officer with the Cooperative Innovation Project in 2015, 2016. I did some contract research, including writing a history of the Center for the Study of Cooperatives. And then I came back full-time to the university as the coordinator for undergraduate research. So my position now, I started in May of 2019. So I tell you guys all of this just to let you know that I've been around the university. I've been in different places around the university. I know the university about as well as you can. And so I'm here to tell you guys what I know about it. So what I did is that I've gone through a lot of the university's websites, and some of the things that I've pulled actually come from the university's website. So when you go to the very first homepage about USask, it's all about, and this is what they say for themselves, building the future through creativity, collaboration, and research success. And this is how we are explained. In the heart of Saskatoon, Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Métis, is the University of Saskatchewan, one of Canada's top research universities. Driven by prairie spirit, we make life better for the people of Saskatchewan and the world. So two things are really, really central to understand about the University of Saskatchewan. The first is that we are part of one of Canada's U15, and the U15 are considered to be Canada's most research intensive universities. So this is something that the University of Saskatchewan prides itself on. It is a member of the U15. This is kind of a group that's been created. You can see all of the other universities that we're in there with, including U of T and UBC, some of the really large universities in Canada. The University of Saskatchewan is also a medical doctoral university, and I would like you to tell me what that means. Put it into the chat. What does it mean when USask says that they are a medical doctoral university? What do you think that means? And I'm going to watch it. And an MD PhD program. Yeah, so that's right. So the University of Saskatchewan has the ability to both train doctors, so people can leave the University of Saskatchewan as an MD, as a trained medical doctor. We also have the ability to award PhDs. Not every university has that. There are levels within universities. Some are just undergraduate universities and they don't have graduate students at all. Ours is not only a graduate university, we are a doctoral university, which means that we can award PhDs. And my PhD comes here from the University of Saskatchewan. So thanks, Genre. That's absolutely right. So that's what it means that USask is a medical doctoral university. We also are one of the few the Western College of Veterinary Medicine. So we also train veterinarians. We also train dentists, which doesn't happen at every university. We have, of course, College of Nursing. We have a whole bunch of things going on here at the U of S. And that's my next slide. So we have a high number of colleges and schools. Agriculture, bioresources, arts and science is the largest college. It's about 50% of the University of Saskatchewan students come through the College of Arts and Science, mostly because it's pretty hard to take a degree at the U of S without taking at least some of your classes through arts and science, whether it's English, Indigenous studies, geography, some of your, of course, your sciences, all your basic sciences, chemistry, biology, physics, they're all there. Geology, that's where my son is, things like that. We also have the School of Public Health, the Johnson Chayama Graduate School of Public Policy, and the School of Environment and Sustainability. Those are 3 new graduate schools that came on that were developed about 10 years ago. We also have a number of affiliated colleges that are affiliated with the U of S. The biggest one that you've probably known about is St. Thomas More, so STM College. It's the Catholic college on campus that's right across from Upper Place Riel. And there are also, you can also take university classes at community colleges around Saskatchewan. So they're not listed, but they are included as well. So that's kind of a little bit about that. There are also a whole bunch of centers, divisions, institutes, research groups, that kind of thing at the university. So these are things like Vito Intervac, which I know in the past year and a half you've heard lots about. They work with infectious diseases on campus. The Canadian Light Source Synchrotron, the Sylvia Fedoruk Center, which actually creates pharmaceuticals. Nuclear pharmaceuticals, a whole bunch of other centers like the Center for the Study of Cooperatives, the Diefenbaker Center on campus. There are a lot of research groups like the Center for Agricultural Medicine. So there's a lot of things going on around campus. We also have research excellence. So there are particular facilities or groups like SuperDarn over in physics, things like that are happening across campus. And if you want to get this PowerPoint from me afterward and take a look through those centers, or just take a look at centers at the University of Saskatchewan, you'll be able to take a look through and see those for yourself. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about university governance, but this is a thing. So the university is actually a nonprofit institution. It's an educational institution. It's considered a nonprofit. They have for-profit colleges in America. We don't really have any of those in Canada, or at least not to that extent. So our executive leadership team, these are the 5 people who sit at the top of the executive heap at the University of Saskatchewan. Our president and vice chancellor, of course, Peter Stoichev. Dr. Irene is our provost and VP academic. Dr. Baljit Singh, he's actually my boss's boss because I work for the Vice President Research, the Office of the Vice President Research. Deborah Bozega Osborne, she is the Vice President University Relations, and Greg Fowler, Vice President Finance and Resources. So if you wanted to kind of split this out, Peter Stoichev, and it's actually Dr. Peter Stoichev, he's actually in the English department, and he plays a really great guitar. So if ever you get a chance to hear him play guitar and sing, he's wonderful. Peter Stoichev is the president. Now, the way that the rest of it is sort of split up is that they each have areas of concern. So the provost and VP academic under her wing are things like student affairs, anything to do with students, education. So your teaching, learning, student experience, anything to do with the professors who, in terms of, whether or not they receive tenure or promotion, those sorts of things, or any kind of professional development things that professors need. Dr. Singh is the Vice President of Research. So his portfolio is all the research that happens at the University of Saskatchewan. So that's where we're going to be concentrating our attention today. But I wanted to give you guys this a little overview. University relations are things like alumni and donors to the University of Saskatchewan, any kind of memorandums of understanding or agreements or recognition that we have between the university, and outside agreements as with the government as well. So government relations falls under that. And Greg Fowler. So finance, of course, well, that's an obvious. It costs a lot of money to run a university, and resources. So things like the buildings and things like investments or insurance, all of these sorts of things fall under Greg Fowler's domain. So that gives you kind of an overview of how university is split, but we are going to be concentrating, as I said, with Dr. Baljit Singh and as the Vice President of Research, and thinking our way through what research looks like. So the way I structured this presentation is to think about, again, to focus in on research, and then as we go forward, we're going to be thinking about research from the perspective of a faculty member. So this comes from the Office of Vice President Research. We're building a dynamic research culture that enriches the academic experience for our students, creates new knowledge across a broad array of disciplines, and helps improve the economic, social, and cultural vitality of our region and beyond. Together, we will unleash discovery the world needs. Of course, that's the tagline for the University of Saskatchewan: be what the world needs, be the university that the world needs. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Hopefully I haven't, freaked anybody out. I'm not going to spend any more time going through the governance and structure of the university, so no worries on that count. But when I first came here as a student, I only thought of the university as a degree granting, like a place to go to get your degree so you can get a job and go back into the real world and get a job. I had absolutely no understanding and no knowledge about the concept of research, or that's actually the main reason why a university exists, is research, not teaching, even though they are a degree granting institution. So this is some of my knowledge that I've kind of built up over time. Why do universities conduct research? Number one, of course, research. So universities are publicly owned in Canada. The University of Saskatchewan exists because the government of Saskatchewan put an act in place to create the University of Saskatchewan. That's why we're here. But this is public ownership, and this is ownership of new knowledge and discovery. So it draws investment both by the provincial government and by industry and nonprofits. All kinds of areas out there will put money into the university. It also, of course, draws students. All of you, for example, you're here for a reason. You chose the University of Saskatchewan, and here you are. Universities also conduct research because they're measured on it. This research helps universities to increase their university ranking. How many of you note every year Maclean's magazine, for example, that's one of many, puts out the university ranking issue, right, where it does interviews and talks about each university, and all the universities across Canada are ranked on a whole array of issues. But one of those things that universities are ranked on is their research. And so they look at how much money is being brought in. They're looking at how high profile that is, if they're really high profile researchers. So are we able to attract and support some of those really high profile researchers? And then they look at metrics. So things like I said, funding, the number of research chairs, and the number of publications. So the number of journal articles and books and things that university professors publish to showcase their research. And the third thing why universities conduct research is because it builds new knowledge. It builds lifelong learners, not just students to become lifelong learners, but every professor on this campus, and most of the staff, including myself, are lifelong learners. So we work really hard to help educate students so that you can become the leaders and the innovators going forward. And when university professors conduct research, what happens is that they're not necessarily bound by what was published in textbooks. I don't know how many of you came through the Saskatchewan high school system, but my children did, and I did, but a long time ago, but my children did. And I remember as a historian being horrified because one of their history books was published in 1989. That was the year that I showed up in university. That's a long time ago now. And there's been a lot more understanding about history and how we think about it and how we teach it, there's been a lot of changes. And so one of the things about university that's maybe a little bit different than high school is that professors in the classroom, because they're conducting cutting edge research, what they bring into the classroom can be the latest knowledge. And that's really, really good. That means that you guys aren't being taught by rote something that happened a long time ago or that people decided happened a long time ago. You're taught the latest cutting edge research and knowledge. So that's one of the reasons why you come to university. So one of the things that the University of Saskatchewan has done is to try and, because we're so big and we have so many different colleges and schools and all these different researchers in all these different centers, and the Global Institute for Food Security and the Global Institute for Water Security and various other centers and pieces that are connected to campus. What the university did a few years, about 10 years ago or so, is decided to create what they call the signature areas of research. And these are areas of outstanding achievement, spaces where the U of S is particularly well known. So at the time, they looked at, they chose the 6 areas of signature areas of research that we're really known for are agriculture, energy and mineral resources, Indigenous peoples, One Health, synchrotron sciences, that's the Canadian light source synchrotron. It's the only one of its kind in Canada, and of course, water security. Now, something that you should know is that the University of Saskatchewan is right now going through a process to revise and expand those signature areas of research. Again, it's not that we're changing our research, it's just taking another look at what's happening on our campus to see if there are other signature areas that we've kind of missed or that we can kind of lift up and recognize. And so there is a process going on. All university students right now can access it. And so if you look at the Office of the Vice President Research and take a look under signature areas, you can actually, and every university student at the U of S has access to this. You can take a look at all the pitches that are coming in right now from professors to say what signature areas they think should be added to this list. And you can read those pitches and you can watch them. They're giving pitches right now. They're all being recorded. So if you want to get involved in that, I recommend it. So if there's areas of the university that you think aren't being represented on our current signature areas, maybe they've come in on the pitches and you can give your feedback on that. So here's another thing that I didn't really understand. Because I didn't really understand the whole thing about professors doing research, I didn't understand why they would. It's like, why would they do that? I thought that they were going to be just like teachers, right? Just sort of higher level and maybe more specialized. When I went to high school, some of my teachers here in Saskatchewan, you know, maybe the guy who taught phys ed might have also taught me history, right? You know, there was a lot of crossover at the university level. Pretty specialized, right? But I didn't really understand this about professors and that they conduct research. But the more I've learned, the more I want to share with you. And number one is that they're trained to do it. So when you get a PhD from the university, the bulk of your training is about research, not teaching. So that's kind of an interesting thing to know. And I didn't really realize that. Because you go through high school and you think that everybody has, you know, an education degree, right? Like they've trained to become teachers, and you walk into university and there's all these professors and they're teaching you. You'd think that they were trained in teaching, but they're not. Very few university professors receive a lot of training in teaching, and it's not necessarily a requirement. It is a requirement that they have a PhD, that they're trained to do research. Some of your really, really good professors will just take to teaching. They're either naturals at it or they work on it. So we have the Gwen Moss Center for Teaching and Learning here on campus, and its purpose is to help university professors become better in the classroom. They also help graduate students and help train graduate students and tutorial assistants to be better in the classroom as well. So the majority of research professors, not all of them, there are a number of professors across campus who have teaching only portfolios. They were hired specifically just to teach. So just so you know that. But the majority of professors have research programs aside from their teaching obligations. And I put this number up, 40% research, 40% teaching, 20% service, because that's considered to be a pretty normal split in terms of how a university professor spends their year. 40% of their time in research, 40% teaching, 20% service. So if ever you hear a 40-40-20, that's the split. And here's the thing, they're measured by it. They're measured by their research. It is the most important thing that they're measured on. That is where the bulk of their merit review and advancement is. So I don't know if you know this about professors, but when they start at a university, for the most part, if they're a brand new PhD and they magically land a job at a university as a tenure track researcher who's also going to teach, how they start at the level of assistant professor. And then after they've proven themselves, they usually get 5 years to do that. After they've proven themselves, they get to move on to associate professor. And usually at that point, they also win tenure. The two don't always go together, but they're close. And then full professor, and then distinguished professor and professor emeritus. But full professor is sort of the goal that everyone who becomes a professor is striving for. Every once in a while, we hire a professor with tenure, or we hire a professor who comes from another university with a lot of experience, and we award them tenure right off the bat. But usually, a professor starts new and they have to work their way up, and they're awarded tenure by their peers. So the other people in their department, the other people in their college say, yep, this person is a good researcher. They've brought in X amount of grant money. They have, finished 1 book or 2 books or 15 journal articles or whatever it is. And yes, we feel confident awarding them tenure. So yeah, tenure. This is how they'll win research chairs. So after they've been researchers for a while and they've got a good body of research and they're becoming really well known, they might be awarded a research chair. These are mostly federally funded chairs, and there's levels of that as well. And so you'll see some of your professors across campus, they're the, Centennial Enhancement Chair and whatever, or they're the Tier 1 Shirk Research Chair in whatever. And so in order for them to win chairs, also to win awards and recognition. So you'll see this a lot. This is something that universities are very proud of, and so they should be. Professors work very hard for their awards and recognition, and often this is based on their research. So those are some of the reasons why professors conduct research. They're trained to do it and they're measured by it. All right, let's take a little pause for just a moment. If anyone has any questions, pop them into the chat if you like. But I wanted to just breathe, take a sip of my Coca-Cola. And then what I thought I would do is I would walk you through what we call the research life cycle here at the university. And think about it. Imagine that you are a brand new faculty member. You've just been hired by the university. You're just starting to set up your research program. What does that look like? How does research work? So I'm going to go through what we call the research life cycle. And if anyone's really curious, this is actually, you can find this on Pause. So the next time you're in Pause, do a little search within Pause on research, and you're going to find research resources specifically designed and put on Pause, because you have to have an NSID to access Pause, right? So it's not on the public facing web, it's on the university web, really, around the research lifecycle. And there's a whole bunch of supports there. And this is a review of what's there. So first of all, the first step in the research lifecycle is about concept and planning, proposal development, and getting funding. So this is sort of the starting place. So where professors sort of imagine what kind of research they want to do, and then they set about finding the funding to do that. So grant writing is one of the major spaces where university professors spend a lot of time, a lot of time is writing grants. There is help from the university. So a new faculty member usually starts with a little bit of base funding so that they can maybe hire a graduate student or two to help them out to get their lab set up or to get their research project or their field work or whatever it is kind of off the ground. It also gives them a little bit of breathing room so that they've got time to write those grants, because it takes a lot of time to write a grant, and you can write a grant, but winning a grant is 2 different things. So for some of the grant competitions, the number of times you apply versus the number of times you actually win a grant, they're very different. Some of the grants out there, only about 15% winning rate versus the number of people who apply for them. So when a faculty member sits down to write a grant, most colleges have what are known as research facilitators. And this is a person who specializes in things like grant writing and specializes in helping a professor identify which grants they could maybe apply for and identify, what that grant application should look like, and then they can help work with them. So these are people at the college level, but we also have people at the university level. So the area of the university that I work for, the Office of the Vice President Research, one of their units is Research Acceleration and Strategic Initiatives, and that's actually where I work. And some of the programs that RASI, so we call it RASI, one of the programs that, or some of the programs that RASI runs are internal review. So let's imagine that you're a new faculty member, you've written up this grant, you want to make sure that it's good. So before you send it off to the big granting agency, you run it through internal review. And that means that we'll bring a few other successful researchers from across the university to read your grant and provide you some feedback on it, just to tighten it up, get it a little bit better, maybe change things around, maybe think about something, maybe add something, maybe drop something. So internal review. We also have a few internal funding opportunities. So most of those come through the president's office, but RASI helps to support and run them. But sometimes professors, might be between grants. Let's say that they had a really big research grant and they've used up that funding and they've got a bit and they're just waiting to hear about another grant, or maybe they've won it but it won't start for another year and they need some bridge funding. So the university has some bridge funding in place to help out with that. Another area that RASI helps out with is strategic facilitation. And that means that if a professor or even 3 or 4 professors at this university want to partner with professors at other universities and maybe some industry partners as well, and maybe there's a really big group of people and they're putting together a really big grant proposal to get a really big amount of money. These are very complex. They take a lot of time, they take a lot of energy. And so strategic facilitation is a pod that we have here on campus of people who are experts in this, and they help with those big, large scale facilitations. We also do a lot of pre-grant review. So just, send it to RASI. They can help you do a bit of a review, make sure that your budget actually lines up and that, you've added everything properly. And there's also post-award support. So there's actually a whole group of people across campus who help when faculty are looking to win funding or when they have won funding. So this is something that I didn't know about university when I was a student, so I thought I'd tell you guys about that. One of the first things that I had to figure out when I came to campus is what all these acronyms meant. So where does funding come from? The most amount of funding that comes onto campus actually comes from the federal government. And what they do is that they have 3 arm's length agencies that they present money to. And then the agency does the calls and the grant calls and reads all the applications and then awards the money. And the 3 major ones, you'll hear something called the tri-agencies. That's what these are. So the first one is CIHR, that's the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. The second is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. You'll hear the word SHRC, and it's SSHRC. My mom, I won a SHRC. I won 2 SHRCs, in fact. And my mother used to spell it SHIRK. All in capital letters, but I wasn't shirking my work, Mom, honest, but that's when people don't know what the acronym is and you hear it named SHRC, that makes perfect sense. And the third is NSERC, Natural Sciences and Engineering Council of Canada. And so NSERC does so all the natural sciences and all the engineering funding comes through NSERC. Speaking as the coordinator for undergraduate research, of these 3, the only one that specifically funds undergraduate students is NSERC. So NSERC has a special award for an NSERC USRA. It's an undergraduate student research assistantship. And I will be working with you if you're hoping to apply for an NSERC USRA. That is going to be moving over. Business or commerce funding, yes, mostly comes from SHRC. Yes, absolutely. That's the primary where it comes from. Great question, though. Thanks. Okay, but there are other places where funding comes from. And this actually does apply to business, just, so business or commerce funding, a lot of the funding that comes in for business or commerce actually can come in from really large companies. So anyway, I'm going to go through this list. So the Canada Foundation for Innovation, what they do is that they like to fund really big research spaces that need a lot of money, just because the research technology that they need might be really, really expensive. And so CFI, a CFI grant tends to be a lot of money because the equipment that they need is very expensive. There's the New Frontiers in Research. Again, that's the Government of Canada. The tri-agencies run it. It's slightly separate, but the tri-agencies run it. Another group where you see a lot of talk around campus, and we are actually going to have MyTax come and give a presentation, is MyTax. And so they work with industry, and so they like to partner industry, university, and students. Checkoff funding, I'll get to that. Checkoff funding, so my husband and I farm. And so every time we sell grain into the elevator, there's what's called a checkoff. So there's a little bit of that money that goes into a fund that is administered by, say, the Saskatchewan Wheat Commission. So the Saskatchewan Wheat Commission, the Saskatchewan Barley Commission, the Canola Council, each of the grains that we grow on our farm, they get a little bit of a cut of that money that we would normally get. And we as farmers do this on purpose because we know that agricultural research is very, very important. And so we'll allow this checkoff funding. And so then these big pots of money are there. And then U of S researchers, particularly, of course, in the College of Agriculture, that is where they go and they apply for research funding from these checkoff groups. So these are, yeah, so it's agricultural money going to support the College of Agriculture. Yeah, the nonprofit societies, that's another area where we get a lot of funding here on campus. So the Canadian Cancer Association. So any time that you get asked to donate towards, it doesn't matter, as multiple sclerosis, cancer, diabetes foundation, any of that kind of stuff, they also have pots of funding that researchers on campus will go to win grants in order to conduct research, obviously, in cancer or diabetes or Parkinson's or whatever it is. So the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's, for example, there are professors on campus who have funding from that foundation. There's also institutional, federal, or industry funded chairs. Remember, I was talking about the chairs programs. So a lot of those chairs, to set up a chairs program, it's not just the faculty member being called a chair. They actually usually get given a big pot of money that they can then hire students, graduate students, postdocs to help them with their research program. And so there's a pot of money that they use to conduct their research. And so usually an industry funded chair is not just the chair, but the funding that goes along with it. We also have seen, and this is something that you'll see in commerce quite a bit, and I was part of a group. So sometimes industry will come along and fund a one-time or a special project. And so the Cooperative Innovation Project is an example of that. Federated Cooperatives in 2015 came along, gave the University of Saskatchewan $1 million. And so we used that $1 million to conduct a year and a half worth of research. And I was hired, and so I was paid out of that $1 million. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is just an example of some of the places where university professors go to get money, to get grant funding to run their research programs. Okay, so let's imagine that you're a professor and you have, yay, won some grant. You won a grant, you won some funding. So what's the next step? So the next step is to kind of explore and get yourself organized. So these are some of the things that you'll need to do. So equipment, let's imagine that you're setting up a lab, or you're setting up a brand new research project where you need some specialty pieces of equipment. I don't know, let's say that you need a particular kind of boat because you're going out to do aquatic research. So you need to actually buy the boat and need to buy some of the equipment that you require to conduct your research. Lab preparation, fieldwork preparation. So the time that it takes to set up your community contacts, to find the space where you're going to go out into the field, to conduct your research, all of that kind of thing. Lots of planning, lots of timelines, things like data organization. So, buying computers, setting up your computers, buying the programs that you might need, that kind of thing. Ethics, this is a big one. So no research on campus, any research that requires ethics approval must have ethics approval before that research starts. This is so important that I'm going to split that. I want to say it again. If your research requires ethics, you have to have that ethics in place before you actually start the research. There's two areas of ethics. There's animal ethics. So if you're using animals to do your research, or you're doing research on animals, for example, lab rats or fish or worms, or you're doing research on bees or horses or cows or whatever. The university actually owns a beef herd and a dairy herd, just so you know. But if you're doing research on animals, there's a whole bunch of ethics that you need to go through around that, including ethics training. So you need to be trained in order to handle these. If you're doing research on humans, and whether that's in a health setting, so you're just collecting research about people and their health, or you're actually doing health related research on people. So, you're recruiting people to, these ones are going to take a placebo and these ones are going to take a drug, that kind of thing. There's really, really high ethics around that. There's even ethics around, I'm a historian and I still have to do ethics, especially if I'm going to be doing anything, interviews, if I'm going to be doing any kind of interviews, that requires ethics approval. And so, or if you're doing surveys, that requires ethics approval. So most of the social sciences and humanities do human and behavioral ethics, and lots of others across campus in the health sciences and veterinary medicine and agriculture are doing animal ethics. There are things across campus, areas across campus where you don't need ethics to conduct the research, but if you do, it must be in place. It also, once you've won your grant funding, this is where you're going to see professors start to advertise. I'm hiring 2 master's students. I'm hiring a PhD student. I'm hiring a postdoc. Especially if they've got a larger research lab, they actually need people in the lab conducting the research that they're interested in. And so they'll support them by hiring them. And then they have to work out an agreement as to, whose research they're doing and how much time they spend on what and that kind of thing. But so yeah, when a professor wins a grant, that's when they turn around and they're hiring students, including undergraduate students. There are lots of professors across campus who consistently hire undergraduate students in their lab for very, very short 4-month contracts in the summer, or a few hours a week that goes all year. They also hire existing researchers. So me as a PhD, for example, I told you that I worked on the Cooperative Innovation Project. So I wasn't hired as faculty, I was hired as a researcher to work on that project. And so that happens as well. And yeah, so I put that arrow there just to remind you that you as students, this is the time, or when a professor wins a grant, and they're ready to start looking around and hiring, that's when their eyes are open and their ears are open, looking for students to come and join them on the journey. All right, so they've got their team in place, they got things going on. The next step in the research life cycle is collection and analysis. So the thing about that is that it does look a little bit different depending on what area of the campus you work in. So I come from social sciences, humanities, history is both, and I have lots of friends in the fine arts. So a lot of the collection and analysis there, it can be scholarly, so literature review, that kind of thing. My friends in the English department spend a lot of time thinking, studying, reading. So that's their collection analysis. Of course, if you're doing artistic work, you need space, you need equipment, you need time to develop your art. If you're doing surveys, focus groups, interviews, that's where your collection and analysis comes in. I'm a historian, so I'm in the archives. That tends to be the space where I spend the most amount of time. And then you collect your data, however you do that, and then you conduct your analysis, and that'll be according to the discipline. So you might be doing survey analysis if you're over in sociology or political studies. Maybe you're doing archival analysis if you're in history. So that depends on your discipline. If you're in the natural sciences, health sciences, or engineering, chances are you're doing more field work or wet lab work. So, and when I say a wet lab, that means like you're dealing with stuff that's either alive or, you know, you're pipetting and you're running experiments. Lots of lab work. So when you're running experiments to collect data, and you're collecting that data in order to have enough data to actually be able to say something and to create new knowledge. You're interpreting the results. The thing about research is that you're actually always interpreting your results. You might be reading your stuff and you're like, oh man, this lab experiment was all over the map, like something's wrong, right? So you go back and you have to fix that experiment so that you can generate good data so that then you can do something with the data, right? So you're constantly interpreting what you've got going on. You need multiple data sets. You can't, it's very, very rare in research that you can do something off of one data set, especially in the natural sciences, health sciences, and engineering. You need multiple data sets, sometimes over multiple years. For example, agriculture. My husband, when he did his master's, had to have multiple data sets over two seasons because he was doing cold tolerance in a particular crop. So he needed multiple data sets. And then same thing, analysis according to the discipline. So that might be statistical analysis. It might be other kinds of analysis. Lots of pictures, lots of photography goes in both. Yeah, so that's the collection and analysis process. Deep breath, another sip of Coke. Okay, the next step in the research life cycle is outputs and publications. So they've collected, they've analyzed, they think that they've got something to say. So this is where a professor, especially in the sciences, you'll hear them talking about writing up their research. Yeah, this is what it is. So this, but there's a few other areas in this as well. Let's say that you're a professor and you've done all this research and you discovered something really cool, something that's actually intellectual property. Maybe you created a new machine in your lab that you know that every other lab across the whole world absolutely must have this machine. You can patent that. That's intellectual property, and then you can start to sell it. You know, and so you can talk to. So we have a whole area again with the Office of Vice President Research, Research Excellence and Innovation. They work with ethics, but they also work with intellectual property. And so they will help professors who maybe they've, so one of the things that we discovered here at the U of S is that we discovered a vaccine for pigs that we had patent on for about 20 years. And the university derived a huge amount of income from that patent. It just went off patent. So, you know, we lost all that funding, but that's an example of a way that a university can create something, patent it, and actually use it as intellectual property. Another thing that an output that sometimes we forget about that's not a publication is your data management. So all of that data that you collected is actually incredibly valuable. And so you need to really take care of it. You need to have good records. You need to actually have written down how you collected that data, where you got it from, what day, what the experiment was. All of these kinds of things are really, really important for your data management, because let's say that 3 years down the road, you want to redo that experiment, or you want to take a look at some of that information that you collected in an archive 3 years ago, but you want to analyze it for a totally different project and analyze it totally differently. If you have good data management practices, then you're going to be able to do that. So good record keeping is critical for good research. And then of course, publishing. So in the sciences, you're going to publish more in journal articles. I'm a historian. I publish books. That's my latest book right behind me. I do publish other things, but books, I do publish journal articles. You'll find book chapters. That's another publication outlet. Conferences and presentations are also considered to be publishing to a certain extent as well. Professors are measured on how much they publish. You'll see, particularly in the sciences, you'll see professors, they actually keep a count. I have 123 publications. I have 256 publications. They actually know down to the number how many publications they have. So that's their metrics. They also are very interested in if they publish in as good a journal as possible. So each journal actually has metrics, and so it's called their impact factor. And so a professor wants to publish wants to publish their stuff in the highest impact factor journal that they can get their stuff accepted into. So there's a lot going on there. And open access publishing. So there are some, and this is becoming more and more and more, especially because a lot of our grants are federally funded. So the federal government is now asking us to publish our stuff in ways that that regular people doing a Google search can find it, not hidden behind a paywall, not pay $35 to access that article, not have to go to university and you guys all pay for the university library, which gives you access to those articles, but to do actually open access publishing. So that's something that's happening more and more and more. And of course, as you're doing this, every researcher is also coming up with ideas for their next research project. So research never ends. You never just do it once. You're always doing it again and again and again. So as you're going through your research, you're coming up with ideas for what you're going to do next and what grants you're going to apply for next. And oh, I'm perfect, you know, for such and such a grant competition that's coming up. I talk with my hands, just so you guys know. Yeah, so ideas for your next research project, that's sort of the next thing that's always percolating in the mind of a researcher. And then the last sort of area in the research life cycle is your impact and your engagement. So that has to do, pardon me, with telling your research story. So we actually have, again, within the Office of Vice President Research Profile and Impact. So that's a unit that helps researchers to tell their research story. So anytime they win grants, awarded chairs, any other awards, any new amazing findings, anything that's really new and interesting that comes out. Journalists call, they call you, they call Research Profile and Impact, they'll call the university. They want to talk to you, they want to interview you, they want to hear about what's happening. So that's your impact and your engagement. And that can happen right from the local level, right up to the national and international level. ORCID is a way for you. So ORCID is a new thing that you can actually, so all students can do this as well. We have a video in our Sure YouTube, just go find it, about establishing your online identity and impact. And this is about ORCID. So I actually have an ORCID number as well. So if anyone emails me and I email you back with my letterhead or, you know, or my signature, my ORCID ID is in my signature, and you can click on that and you can go see all the things that I've published. And this has to do with your research metrics, which are tracked. So the university tracks that by department, by college, by research center. The university always knows how much research it has going on so that they can track it. Again, going all the way back to the beginning of the presentation around how universities move up the ranking system. In part, it's because of the research, and that's because we track it. We track how much people are publishing, how much people are getting out there, how many times they're going to conferences and guest speakers and that kind of thing as well. Commercialization and innovation is another way that we can really track our impact and our engagement. And so again, that goes back to intellectual property. Research excellence and innovation helps professors. Let's say that they came up with something that's so cool that another business will come along and buy the patent for that or lease the patent for that, and then they'll make money off of that, but the university makes money as well as the professor who came up with this, you know, aha invention. So that can happen as well. Research excellence and innovation we've actually had university professors from the U of S who've gone on Dragon's Den and been successful there. So that can happen. So I'm going to stop with the presentation, the formal presentation, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open it up. If you have any questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and it'll just be me. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and type it into the chat. I hope I didn't freak anybody out. I hope I didn't bore any of you, but I didn't know this stuff about universities, and I think I probably would have understood what was happening a lot better if I had. So I thought that I'd give the opportunity to give you guys a bit of an overview of how research works. And now over to you for questions. You're a quiet bunch. I know some of you, so if you don't ask questions, I'll be calling on you. How can research lead to a business idea? Actually, that's a really good question. Number one, I'm going to tell you that This past summer, Research Excellence and Innovation organized a whole bunch of seminars for the Summer Sure program, and they are all still available. And so if you're really curious to get into the details of that, but let's go back to that example of that vaccine. So it's not the university, the vaccine, the pig vaccine. Every pig around the world has received this vaccine. They still receive this vaccine. I can't remember what it does, but it, protects them from something. That vaccine was developed here at the U of S, but what happened was, so it was patented, and then the patent was leased by a company that then took the patent, and then what their business model is that they pay the U of S for the patent, but they take on all of the risk of actually creating that vaccine, marketing that vaccine, getting it shipped out all around the world, and so on and so forth. So they made their money from that, but the university also made money because they had to pay us each year for the right to use that patent. So that's an example of how research can lead to a business idea. And there's tons of others, but in the sciences, that can also happen. So that's an example of how that happens. This has all been fascinating. I feel like you've given us a sneak peek behind the scenes. Thanks for sharing all this information with us. Yeah, as far as I know, I won't get into any trouble for telling you guys about this. So is it true that researchers live off grant money? No. So professors are actually paid by the university. The exception would be if they happen to win an industry research chair, then an industry research chair, they might take the professor's salary out of that research chair fund first, and then anything over and above that, they get to use towards research, whether it's paying students or whether it's buying equipment or the costs of running their lab or whatever. In other universities around the world, particularly in Europe, you will see that model. You will actually see professors that if they don't win grants, they don't get paid. That doesn't happen here. But it's a really good question. I have to jump off, but this is excellent, paving the way for sure. You're welcome. As an undergraduate student with little lab experience due to COVID-19, what are some good opportunities to obtain research experience, and how would one go about approaching a professor to seek out research opportunities? Well, that's a great segue to the Sure event that we have going on next week, which is all about how to do that, how to approach a professor for a research position. So please come to that, sign up for it if you haven't. Go look on the website and sign up for it. But we are doing a session next week. I believe it's Thursday, same time, same place, and it's me. And I'll give you guys the best hints that I know about how to find those research opportunities. Suraj says, as a first-year student, what can you do at an individual level? Do we need to have a team or professor backing us? Yes. So you can do scholarly work on campus, like like a literature review, that kind of thing. You can always do artistic work, but if you're doing any kind of research work that requires you to either talk to people and collect surveys or data or any of that kind of stuff, then you need ethics and you need a supervisor. If you need to be in a lab actually generating that data, like running research, running experiments, then you absolutely need to have a supervisor for that. But having said that, there are a high number of classes around the university that do have research experiences built right into at the classroom level. So look out for those. There are experiential classes where they often do a lot of research. There are capstone classes, there are honors classes where research, especially a research project, is actually part of the class. And so that will give you sort of your first taste of research, because research is a skill set that you build year over year over year. How do you find student research positions? Erin, come back next week. I will tell you all about that. Sheila, hi Merle, I have a question about data management. Is there a recommended format or software or way to collect the data? I'm going to answer and then I'll read the second part of your question. It depends, Sheila, on what you're researching and what your what data you're collecting. Me as a researcher, because I go into an archive, I take a lot of pictures, sometimes with a camera, sometimes even just with my phone, because especially if I'm in a hurry, it's like take a picture, flip the page, take a picture, flip the page, of what so that I can take that data home and then manage it myself. So then it's around things like, did I label that file properly? Do I have enough storage? Make sure that you've got good data storage, an external hard drive, these sorts of things around safety. In terms of other aspects of data management, I do high recommend, there is a session with Kevin Reed that we recorded this summer in May around data management. And if you have 45, I think it's about 50 minutes long, high recommend to go and watch that. It's on the Sure YouTube website, and it's called Research Data Management. And I high recommend for that because Kevin is a librarian and he studies data management. That's his subject, that's his area of interest. And he has some really great recommendations of some best practices around that. So high recommend there. Also for grant funding, is there a database for the grants that might come? Are there specific guidelines for different? Yes. Yes, there's a database. There's a couple of them, in fact. So the Office of the Vice President Research and also the unit that I work for, Research Acceleration and Strategic Initiatives, we have all the upcoming grants listed. So they're listed both by those that have no date and those that have, you know, specific dates. And we also maintain a database, and that's on SharePoint, but you as students would be able to access it because you have an NSED that gives examples of past winning grant applications, which professors find really valuable because, you know, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. If you know that they won a grant last year from that very similar competition, well, maybe they've got some ideas of how it should be structured and how long it should be and what it should look like. Also, there are always guidelines. Every single grant has its own guidelines, how many pages, what they're looking for, what can be included, what the limitations are. And they'll even give really specific things like you get 5 pages, but you've got to have an inch margin and 12-point font and like all kinds of things that are really specific. And if you veer outside those, that's an automatic, that's it. You won't even be considered for the grant. Deadlines are also very important for grants. Do not ever miss a deadline on a grant application because you will be discarded from that grant. So Sheila, if you have more questions, Sheila used to work for me, so just feel free to text or send me an email. Hopefully that answered pretty much everything. In an honors program, would research also be funded by grants? Oftentimes, yes. Not that you'd be paid necessarily as a student, because you can't be paid as an honors student because it's a class. So your pay for doing your honors work is the class, right? It's going to go on your transcript. But oftentimes what happens is a student is working with a professor who already has a lab, and they're using their grant money to bring in the supplies for the lab, to pay for the lab, to run the machines in the lab, that kind of thing. And so you might be funded kind of secondarily almost by that grant funding. And so that does matter. And so if you're looking to get an honors position, you definitely want someone who's got an active and viable and well-funded grant lab or research team. So tangentially, yes, you yourself as an honor student wouldn't be paid. However, I know lots of honor students who are working on their honors project, but they're also hired by that lab as a research assistant for, maybe 3 hours a week or 5 hours a week as a research assistant. So they end up being in that lab doing both things, both their honors project and working as a research assistant. How many publication citations on average are needed for tenure? That's a really good question, and it totally depends on the discipline. Some disciplines need more, some need less. So that's actually a department level decision as to what is required. So and here's another thing is that, let's say that you were hired 5 years ago and you're coming up for tender, you have to abide by, or you fall under whatever rules were in place when you were hired. Let's say that the department did a big review 3 years ago and there's all new tender guidelines. They don't apply to you because you were hired before those guidelines came into place. And so whatever guidelines were in place when you were hired, that's what you're under. And those are really changing as well. What we're seeing is that you need to produce more and more and more and more just to achieve tenure. I myself have never landed a tenure track faculty position, even though I have 4 published books and 2 Saskatchewan Book Awards. I've never landed a tenure track position. I actually have more publications than some of the professors in the history department who have tenure. It's the system is not fair and it's a bit odd. Thank you. That was really interesting. You're welcome. Do you have any tips for pursuing undergraduate research in the humanities, specifically in history? We'll talk a bit more about tips next week. Sorry, my cat is trying to climb up on top of things. History is a little bit different in that you don't always need to be joining someone's grant in order to kind of pursue history. There are archives right at the U of S, right on campus. So we're kind of lucky in that our research space, our lab space, tends to be the archive, which is already there. So yeah, if you want to reach out to me individually, then please feel free, Brianne. I can help you out with that and give you some more thoughts on that, if that's okay. And also next week, I will dive a little bit more specifically into what it looks like in the humanities as opposed to what it looks like in the sciences when you're looking for a summer position. Would an analysis of the quality of YouTube internet content be a potential project for the SURE Symposium? Did you know that the SURE Symposium that just finished here at the end of August, the top winning project was actually a YouTube analysis of information around dental caries that you can find on YouTube. So it was a content analysis. If so, would this still require contacting a professor to supervise, since this doesn't necessarily require lab research? Not necessarily. What you'll find though is that if you can find a professor, you still need to be really, really clear in how you set up your research, you know, what your parameters were, your research question, all of these sorts of things. You'll get a much better, you'll get a much higher, these are the sorts of things that judges are looking for, because that's also part of the research process, is to actually set a research question, show how you conducted your research. You know, so you have to say, I did a search with these search terms on YouTube, and I looked at X number of videos, and, you know, they were this long, or, you know, that kind of thing. So you'd actually have to be really, really specific about how you conducted your research. But you're right, research project like that doesn't necessarily require ethics. What it might be improved by is having a professor, maybe there's a professor that you've worked with or a professor that you know who might take a look at your research project, just because you asked them, and ask them to provide some feedback for you. And I would highly recommend that. There is no research done in a vacuum that's perfect the first time out. Even that book that my cat is now sitting in front of, when I finished my original manuscript, I sent it out to multiple people to give me feedback on the manuscript before I cut it down and sliced it down. So feedback is always important, and that's something that you get that's embedded in a research experience. Brianne, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for the workshop. So helpful. Thank you very much. Very helpful and informative. I'm so glad. So, like I said, if you're looking for a research job, that's next week. But I wanted to kind of give you guys a bit of an overview of what research looks like. I know SURE is focused on the undergrad level, but do you know if there are any sessions about applying for grad school, crafting proposals, etc.? Yes, there are. The College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies is doing a great job. Take a look on what they call their grad hub. They actually have one that might even be today or tomorrow, but it's coming up soon this week around. And we also did one through the SURE program about applying for graduate school. We did that in June, and it's on the SURE YouTube website. So feel free, because that came from the College of Graduate Studies, and that information is still very relevant, that we only recorded it in June. So yes, you are all very welcome. Have a wonderful evening. Yes, that's Itsy Bit. She says hello. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm going to stop the recording, and that is the end of this presentation. Take care, everyone.